Well, details of that budget to come on Wednesday. Here, though, the Scottish budget passed into law just last week, not without its own controversies. Purse strings are tight, and there's a lot of grumbling, most audibly in council chambers. The Scottish Government's pledge to freeze our council tax has helped a lot of households, but it's done nothing for relations with local authorities, some now in open revolt. The Deputy First Minister and Finance Secretary has written to Jeremy Hunt asking him to come up with plans that would mean more money for Scotland. And I'm pleased to say that Shona Robison joins me live now from our Dundee studio. Good morning to you.
Good morning.
Thanks for being with us this morning. So Jeremy Hunt, speaking to our colleagues on other Sunday programmes this morning, saying he's looking to cut taxes as much as he can, even if it's not perhaps as much as he'd have wanted. He might cut national insurance, which of course would have an impact on us all here in Scotland. We'd put a bit more money in our pockets. Would he be right to do that?
Well, like most of the organisations and commentators like the IMF, the OBR, the IFS and others are all saying the same as I am, and that is that the spring budget should prioritise investment in public services, not tax cuts. All of these organisations have said the same, that tax cuts are unaffordable, and indeed it's the investment in public services that are needed. So I agree with that, and I really hope that Wednesday will see a change in the direction that Jeremy Hunt takes, particularly on investment and capital, so that we can invest in our infrastructure, things like affordable housing, for example. So those are the key priorities that I and many others are calling on Jeremy Hunt to prioritise.
Yeah, I mean, there will be those who are saying right now that you're not prioritising affordable housing because you cut that budget by 26% yourself. We'll come to your budget in a second, though. Jeremy Hunt was making the point that if you look around America, look around Asia, it's the lowest taxed economies that are registering the fastest economic growth at the moment. And everybody in your position at the moment, certainly from the opposition parties, is saying growth is absolutely at the centre of everything. You know, a rising tide lifts all boats. What do you say to that?
Well, of course, we support economic growth, but, you know, the UK economy has gone into recession. So they claim to be cutting taxes, but they have an economy that's gone into recession. One of the ways to get the economy growing, of course, is the investment in infrastructure. And that's why it's so important that they reverse the 10% cut to our capital budget, 1.6 billion less that we will have to spend over the next 5 years. That needs to be reversed so we can invest in our infrastructure, which helps the economy grow.
More immediately, there are other measures we will discuss in a second. Let's get on then to your budget. Let me go through a few reactions to Wednesday or to Tuesday's passing of the budget into law. COSLA said it was no good for communities. Net zero is going to be harder to achieve. The Child Poverty Action Group, bitterly disappointing. It's stalled progress on tackling child poverty. Shelter Scotland are saying this morning your government has been gaslighting the country and the First Minister has no credibility. Homes for Scotland, your budget will perpetuate housing inequality. Not the reaction you'd have been looking for.
Well, look, our budget has been really challenging because we've had a real terms cut to the funding coming to Scotland. So that has meant difficult choices. But let me take child poverty. We have estimating now to be lifting 100,000 children out of poverty because of the decisions and investments that we have made in, for example, the Scottish Child Payment. The affordable housing issue and the difficult decision we've had to make there, of course, isn't just due to the 10% cut in capital, but the 62% cut in financial transaction funding from the UK government, which has underpinned our affordable housing supply programme. That has a consequence to affordable housing. Now, I have said it is the #1 issue that I would want to address if we get that additional capital from the spring budget on Wednesday. And I really hope we see additional capital because I want to invest in affordable housing because I know how important it is as an anti-poverty lever and, of course, for economic growth as well.
You say that, but and you make it sound like an absolute priority, but you have to make decisions within your £60 billion budget, and your decision here was to cut the affordable housing budget by 26%. You didn't do that to other areas.
Well, we've just had a cut to the financial transactions that underpin. This is funding that is ring-fenced, that we use for our affordable housing supply programme, cut by 62%. In fact, just in the last 2 weeks, we got notice from the Treasury that we were going to cut that funding by a further £64 million. That cannot be done in a way that does not impact on the affordable housing supply programme. Now, I want to look at ways of replacing that funding, but I need the Chancellor on Wednesday to reverse the cut to capital. I will make that our #1 priority of investment if we see that.
OK, I mean, so Shelter Scotland saying you're gaslighting the public, Homes for Scotland saying you're perpetuating housing inequality. Are they failing to understand the pressures under which you're having to work?
Well, look, I respect all of these organisations and they're quite right in pushing and lobbying for affordable housing. We agree. We have a good track record on affordable housing, Martin. As I'm sure you're aware, I think the latest was about 117,000 affordable homes delivered since 2007. We have a good track record and we want to deliver our 110,000 target by 2032. But with a 1.6 billion cut to capital and a 62% cut to the financial transactions funding, that has an impact, and it's very difficult within our constrained capital resources to find where money could have been shifted. But it's a #1 priority, and let's see what Wednesday brings.
All right, let's look at a spending commitment you have made. Council tax, the council tax freeze. You're underwriting a 5% increase in council tax across local authorities. Many of them are unhappy about it. Some of them are saying they just simply can't live within those strictures. Do you regret the way this has been handled? Listeners and viewers will remember this was announced absolutely out of nowhere at the end of your party conference last autumn and provoked a really furious reaction. You've fallen out with a lot of local authorities over it. Battle lines are drawn. Should this have been handled better?
Well, look, it is an intervention for 1 year in the midst of a cost of living crisis that can help with household budgets. And of course, out of the 30 local authorities that have set their council tax, 28 of them have agreed to freeze it. And that means supporting household budgets at this difficult time. And of course, we're providing £210 million to local authorities to help them freeze the council tax. And we expect that council taxpayers get some benefit out of that investment. And of course, the Accounts Commission, which has reported on the last 2 years of local authority funding, has confirmed that we have given local government a real terms increase over those last 2 years. And indeed, we will be giving local authorities a real terms increase in the coming year. In a difficult financial budget and constrained finances, I think local government has been treated fairly.
Really? Because COSLA are saying that in order for local authorities to meet that freeze, public services are inevitably going to have to be cut. So effectively, you have cut public services.
Well, we have given and offered local government a real terms increase, actually better than most other areas of the public sector. But
not enough to match the rising costs that they're facing.
Well, that's not to say, Martin, that local government, like all parts of the public sector, are not facing challenges. Of course they are. But compared to other parts of the public sector, what I'm saying is that they have been given a real terms increase at levels higher than most of the public sector. In fact, they have an increasing share of the Scottish Government budget overall, so a smaller cake. They have a larger slice of it, going from 31 to 32%. But actually, all of the local government associations, including COSLA, have written to the Chancellor saying the same thing, that instead of funding tax cuts, he should fund investment in public services. So on that, we absolutely agree with them.
Well, a couple of them have written to Michael Gove saying, help us out and start funding us directly, because this lot in Holyrood simply aren't helping us enough. What do you make of that? He says he's going to speak to them. He might even talk to them about funding them.
Well, to be honest, Martin, I think Michael Gove would be the last person to be giving any advice on local government finance. Look at the position of English councils. 8 have gone bust, 4 of them under Michael Gove's watch over the last year and a bit. And in fact, a recent survey of English council leaders said that 50% of them were predicting that they would go bust in the next 5 years. So I think Michael Gove is the last person. In fact, there'll be a queue of English council leaders wanting to have some FaceTime with Michael Gove for the very area he is responsible for. I would suggest that might be a better use of Michael Gove's time.
OK, well, when you explain to us the way that this whole thing works and you give the councils their budget, they simply have to work within it. We all have pressures that we have to face. That's kind of tough. You've just got to make it work. Isn't that exactly how leaders at Westminster speak to you and you become furious about it when it happens to you, you're just passing that down the chain, aren't you? You're treating councils like Westminster treat you.
No, I don't believe so. I think we've worked very hard with local government to address some of the issues that they've raised. So, for example, nearly £1 billion of ring fencing removed from their budgets. That was a key ask. A larger share of funding, 31% to 32%. That was the key ask of local government. They wanted to see an increasing share of the budget. We have delivered that. But times are difficult for the whole of the public sector, so we'll continue to work with local government, supporting them in the best way that we can. But all eyes are now on Wednesday in terms of whether the funding available to us is going to be impacted negatively, which it could be, or whether we get the additional capital investment that we so badly need.
OK. Elsewhere in the budget, education and skills, up 5%. Transport, net zero and just transition, up almost 5%. Economy, fair work and energy, down 5%. You just told me at the start of this interview that you're a government focused on economic growth. Where's the evidence for that?
Well, of course, we are investing in areas like green energy, important areas, and, of course, we're supporting businesses through the small business bonus scheme.
Well, you could have given them 75% rate relief, and you were given the money to do that, and you chose not to. You chose to spend it elsewhere. Where's your focus on economic growth?
So if I had done that, Martin, I would have been giving 260 million out of the 310 million consequentials we got to business tax cuts instead of the NHS.
Hospitality and retail businesses.
So I've been honest with the hospitality sector, and I've met them on a number of occasions now, and I've said to them it was a stark choice of either funding business tax cuts or funding the NHS. Now, I'm afraid the NHS wins every time, and I think the public would be with me on that decision. So these are hard decisions, and we had to prioritise the funding to public services, frontline public services, in the NHS, local government, police and fire, and that's what we've done.
Fine, so here's the NHS. Here's a quote, direct quote from the Institute for Fiscal Studies, who've been reviewing your budget meticulously, line by line. Funding for the Scottish Government's health and social care portfolio is set to fall by 0.7% in real terms in 2024-25, despite official budget documentation showing a 1.3% real terms year-on-year increase. Are you really prioritising the NHS, and are you being straight with the figures?
So we are prioritising the NHS, and of course what the IFS were referring to was the comparison with the in-year position. So we've compared the budget to the start of last year's budget, and of course within that year money went into the NHS for things like Agenda for Pay. That will happen this year, and of course we are calling on the UK government to fund the Agenda for Pay deal so that we can put that money in year. So that additional money for NHS pay will go in year. So you've got to compare the same things, the budget at the start of the year, and then we can compare the budget through the year, and that's what we'll do.
All right, let me move on to other issues. I'm looking at the front page of the Sunday National here. Time to revisit Westminster withdrawal. This is your party's deputy leader, effectively saying that after all the dispute and discord at Westminster over recent weeks, you should maybe think again about your cooperation there, about being represented there. What do you make of that?
Well, I think our SNP parliamentary group at Westminster has an important role to play in leading on issues like, for example, Gaza, when they brought forward a debate that recognised, for example, the need for an immediate ceasefire, talked about the collective punishment of millions of people. And I think that is where the SNP is at its best on leading on these issues. There is a debate to be had in terms of the role of our parliamentary group, but from my perspective, they are best when they are highlighting key important issues and leading from the front, as they have been doing on the issue of Gaza, for example.
Would you be worried if they were talking about withdrawing?
Well, I'm not aware that they are talking about that.
They're talking about revisiting it. That's a start.
Well, I think what they're focused on, and I know that Stephen Flynn as the leader is focused on, is making sure the SNP continue to lead on the issues that people are concerned about, like Gaza, and that's what they'll continue to do. Quite rightly.
Talking of dialogue and so on, and the atmosphere actually in the country, Rishi Sunak was speaking about the country being on the brink of mob rule. George Galloway's been turning up the rhetoric in recent days as well. I mean, that's largely south of the border, these areas that they're referring to. How would you assess the temperature here just now?
Well, I think politics can be quite a toxic place at times. I think some of the rhetoric is not always helpful. What I do believe, though, is that Rishi Sunak should have a bit of self-reflection on the role that him and his government have had, and the culture wars that they've created, taking terrible stances on things like Rwanda and the ridiculous position that they have on asylum seekers and refugees. And I think actually the right to protest is a fundamental right. Of course, it has to be done peacefully and legally. And I think our police should be left to do what they do rather than politicians trying to direct our police. So the police have a really important role. They do it well, and we should allow them and enable them to get on with the job that they do.
All right. Just before we let you go, you're going to have an enhanced and important role, I would imagine, sometime soon. Very good news. Hamza Yusuf, First Minister, and his wife expecting another baby. He will no doubt go on paternity leave. You looking forward to acting up as First Minister?
Well, first of all, a big congratulations to both of them. It's fantastic news. And, of course, Mary McCallan as well, who is in a really important role. And I think it shows that women can actually have senior roles within government and also go on to have a family. So I have stepped up a number of times at First Minister's questions. I haven't had a chance to discuss with the First Minister what the arrangements will be, but I'm sure he will want to take the appropriate time to spend with his family at what will be a very exciting time for them.
Yes, and there we should leave it. We'll be speaking to you again in whatever office soon, I'm sure. Shona Robison, Deputy First Minister, Finance Secretary, thank you very much indeed for your time this morning.
Thank you.
Andrew Kerr there at the Scottish Conservative Spring Conference in Aberdeen. Regular viewers and listeners, of course, will note that we usually bring you an interview with a party leader or a senior figure at conference time. Douglas Ross unavailable this morning due to childcare issues, and no other senior representative was made available either. I'm sure, however, we will speak to Douglas Ross soon enough.